The road into the village of Port Blossom was long and winding. It twisted like a ribbon of grey silk through hills that were turning the colours of a fading bruise. Purple, gold, a deep, rusty red. My family's car hummed along, the only sound for miles except for the whisper of the wind through the tall, dry grass. We were leaving the city behind, leaving everything we knew for a new life by the sea. Dad said it would be an adventure. Mum said it would be quiet. I just hoped I wouldn't be lonely. The air already smelled different here, thick with the scent of salt and damp earth. It was a lonely smell. We passed old farmhouses with sagging porches and barns whose paint had peeled away long ago. They looked like sleeping giants, tired and ancient. No one seemed to be outside. No cars passed us on the road. It felt as if we were driving into a forgotten world, a place that time had decided to leave alone. My little sister Maya was asleep in the back seat, her head lolling against the window. She was too young to understand the heaviness of leaving. For her, this was just a long car ride. For me, every mile marker felt like a goodbye to my friends, my school, my life. I stared out at the endless fields, a knot tightening in my stomach, smaller than I had imagined. A handful of shops lined a single main street. A post office, a general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign, a tiny library. The houses were mostly old, made of wood that had been weathered by years of sea spray and winter storms. Gulls cried overhead, their calls sharp and piercing against the quiet. It was peaceful, just as Mum had promised, but it was a heavy kind of peace, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I didn't feel adventurous. I felt small. We turned off the main street and headed toward the coast. Our new house was on a hill overlooking the water. Dad had called it a fixer-upper with character. As we drove up the gravel path, I saw it for the first time. It was a salt box house, stark and grey against the darkening sky. It stood alone, with no other houses nearby. The wind, the sea, the tall, swaying grass. It didn't look like it had character. It looked like it had secrets. The car crunched to a stop, and the silence that followed was immense. We were here. We were home. The first few days were filled with the noise of moving, boxes being torn open, furniture scraping across wooden floors, Mum and Dad's voices echoing in empty rooms. The house was bigger inside than it looked. Crooked floors, low ceilings, the smell of old wood and something else, dried flowers, cold stone. I found a spot for my bed under a window looking out over the ocean. At night, the only light was the distant blink of a lighthouse, a single lonely eye in the darkness. It was a comfort, a sign someone else was out there. When the unpacking slowed and the house felt like ours, the quiet returned, a different kind of quiet. Not empty, full of the house's own sounds, the groan of wood settling, the rattle of a window pane, the sigh of wind pushing at the walls. I told myself these were normal for an old house by the sea. I tried to believe it. One afternoon I walked the beach below the house. The sky was overcast, solid grey. Waves crashed with a steady, hypnotic roar. I was collecting shells, looking for ones whole and perfect. As I bent to pick up a spiral shell, I heard it. Not wind or waves. A whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A single word on the breeze, I couldn't make it out. It sounded like a woman's voice, soft, sad. I stood and looked. No one. The beach was empty for miles. I told myself it was just the wind. The wind can play tricks. It can sound like voices if you listen too hard. I walked back toward the house, pockets heavy with shells, feeling watched. The house on the hill stared down with dark, empty windows. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind. It wasn't just a sigh now, it was a murmur. It curled around the corners, whispering things I couldn't understand. I pulled the covers to my chin and closed my eyes. The sound followed me into my dreams. Our house was built in the 1700s. That's what the man at the Historical Society told me when I visited the village library. He was old, with glasses as thick as bottle bottoms. He said our house was one of the oldest in Port Blossom. He told me it was a fine example of a salt box, built to withstand the nor'easters that battered the coast. He didn't say much else. When I asked if anyone had lived there for a long time, his smile faded. He polished his glasses. Old houses have long memories. His words stuck with me, sending a little shiver down my spine. There were places in it that felt older than others. The narrow, winding staircase that led to the attic was one. The steps creaked and groaned under my weight, as if complaining. The air grew colder. The attic was a cavern of shadows and dust. Old trunks sat like sleeping beasts covered in cobwebs. Light struggled through a single, grimy porthole window. A place for forgotten things. A place where the past felt very, very close. I didn't stay up there for long. Downstairs in the main living area was a massive fireplace. Dark, rough-hewn stones. Big enough to stand inside. It hadn't been used in years. Mum said it was a fire hazard. We shouldn't touch it. Sometimes I would sit in front of it, tracing the soot-stained bricks with my finger. It always felt colder near the fireplace, even when the sun streamed through the windows. A dead, still cold that radiated from the stones. It clung to my clothes and made the hairs on my arms stand up. Maya didn't seem to notice the strangeness. She would play for hours with her dolls in the living room, her laughter echoing off the old wooden beams. But she never played near the fireplace. If a toy rolled too close to the hearth, she would leave it, refusing to go get it. She'd come find me, lower lip trembling, and ask me to get it for her. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it too, the cold spot, the heart of the house's memory. The cold wasn't just near the fireplace anymore. It started to move, a sudden chill in a warm hallway, a draft in a room with all the windows shut tight. I'd be reading on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket. A wave of icy air would wash over me, making me gasp. I'd look up, expecting to find a door left open. Everything would be closed. The feeling would be gone as quickly as it came, leaving me feeling foolish and jumpy. Mum said it was just the quirks of an old house. Dad said we needed to check the insulation. They had an explanation for everything, but their explanations didn't make sense. The cold wasn't a normal draft. It was heavy. It had a presence. One evening, we were all eating dinner. The kitchen was warm and smelled of roasted chicken. I was telling a story about school when I felt it. The cold started at my feet and crept slowly up my legs, like icy water. My teeth started to chatter. I looked at Mum and Dad, but they were laughing, not noticing a thing. Only Maya was staring at me, her eyes wide.
The cold lady is here.
My fork clattered onto my plate. What did you say?
Maya, don't be silly, there's no lady.
She's sad.
The cold was all around me now, a suffocating blanket of ice. I couldn't breathe. I pushed my chair back and ran from the room, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't stop until I was outside in the yard, gulping in the fresh, salty air. After that, I started to believe Maya. The cold spot wasn't just a place, it was a thing, a presence. Sometimes, late at night, I would see it. Not with my eyes, but in my mind. A shimmering in the air, like heat rising from pavement, only it was the opposite of heat. It would drift slowly through the downstairs rooms, pausing in front of the fireplace, then moving toward the stairs. It never went upstairs. It hovered at the bottom step, as if waiting, or as if it couldn't go any further. I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that it was searching, just like Maya said. The whispering on the wind grew more frequent. I would hear it when I was walking home from the school bus, a soft, mournful sound weaving through the rustling leaves. I still couldn't understand the words, but the feeling behind them was clear. It was a sound of immense loss, of a sorrow so deep it had stained the very air of this place. The whispering was always strongest near the house, as if it was tied there, unable to leave. Then came the music. It started one night when I was trying to fall asleep. The house was silent, except for the rhythmic crash of the waves outside. At first, I thought it was the radio from a passing car, but the sound didn't fade. It was a melody, a simple, haunting tune played on a piano. The notes were faint, fragile, like they were traveling a long, long way to reach me. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The music was sad, just like the whispers. It was a lullaby, but a lullaby for someone who would never sleep again. I crept out of my room and stood at the top of the stairs. The music was coming from downstairs. Our house didn't have a piano. I knew that for a fact. Yet the melody floated up from the living room, clear as day. It seemed to be coming from the corner where an old, dusty rocking chair sat. The chair was empty, but as I watched, it began to move, just a little. A slow, gentle rock, back and forth, in perfect time with the sad, simple tune. The music filled the house, a melody of grief that seeped into the very walls. I didn't go downstairs. I couldn't. I was frozen at the top of the stairs, my hand clutching the banister so tightly my knuckles were white. The rocking chair swayed in the darkness below, keeping time for an unseen musician. The melody rose and fell, a heartbreakingly beautiful sound that had no source. It went on for what felt like hours. I don't know when it finally stopped. I must have fallen asleep right there on the top step, because I woke up in the morning with a stiff neck, curled in a ball on the floor. The house was silent. The rocking chair was still. It was as if nothing had happened. The sea mists in Port Blossom were famous. They rolled in from the ocean without warning, swallowing the landscape in a blanket of thick, white fog. You could be walking under a clear blue sky, and just minutes later, you wouldn't be able to see your own hand in front of your face. The villagers said the mists had a life of their own. They said you had to be careful not to get lost. One afternoon, a heavy mist rolled in while I was on the beach. I had been exploring the tide pools, and honestly, I didn't notice it until it was all around me. The house on the hill vanished completely. The sound of the waves seemed to come from all directions at once. I knew I should head straight up the path to the house, but in the disorienting fog, I wasn't sure which way to go. A prickle of fear ran down my neck. It was easy to get turned around, to walk toward the crumbling cliffs instead of toward the safety of the path. The air was cold and wet, and the silence was unnerving. That's when I saw her. At first, she was just a darker shape in the grey mist, a tall, slender silhouette standing near the water's edge. I thought it might be another person from the village, also caught in the fog. I almost called out, but something stopped me. The figure was unnaturally still. She was wearing a long dress, the kind you only see in old photographs. Her hair was piled on top of her head. Even from a distance, I could feel an overwhelming sadness coming from her. She was staring out at the ocean, at the place where the waves disappeared into the white wall of fog. She didn't seem to notice me. She just stood there, a statue of grief. The mist swirled around her, making her edges soft and indistinct. She looked like she was made of smoke and sorrow. I took a step back, my foot crunching on a bed of dry seaweed. The sound was loud in the silence. The figure turned her head slowly, so slowly toward me. I couldn't see her face. It was a blur, a smudge in the fog. But I knew she was looking at me. A cold dread, far colder than the mist, washed over me. I turned and ran, stumbling blindly, not caring which way I was going, only knowing I had to get away from her. Life in the house became a series of small, terrifying rituals. I learned not to leave my bedroom door ajar at night. Sometimes I'd wake to find it wide open, as if someone had looked in on me while I slept. I learned to hum when I walked the downstairs hallway to block out whispers that clung to the walls. I learned to walk around the cold spot in front of the fireplace, giving it a wide berth, just as Maya did. We were living with a ghost. We never said the word, but we both knew it. We were sharing our home with an unseen guest. The presence grew bolder. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen doing homework at the table. A glass of water sat beside my book. I looked down, reading a chapter, when a shadow fell over the page. I looked up. The sky was clear. The kitchen had grown dark and cold. The glass began to tremble. Tiny ripples disturbed its surface. A sudden sharp crack, a long fracture split the glass. Water trickled out, pooling on the wooden table. I hadn't touched it. No one had. Objects began to move on their own, not theatrically, but in small, subtle ways. A book left on the sofa would appear on the mantelpiece. A seashell from my collection would sit on the bottom stair, where the cold gathered.
Mom was baking. She turned away for a second for flour, then the salt shaker was tipped over, a neat pile of white crystals on the counter. That's strange. I could have sworn I didn't touch that.
But the most chilling event happened to Maya. She was playing with her ragdoll, yarn hair and button eyes. I was in the next room hearing her chatter. Suddenly, a piercing scream. I ran in, Maya huddled in a corner, sobbing. The ragdoll lay in the center of the room, its head torn clean off.
She doesn't like her, the sad lady. She said the doll was hers.
The doll's button eyes stared up, shocked and betrayed. The visit to the Historical Society had unsettled me, so I decided to go back. I needed to know more. The old man was there again, sitting behind his large wooden desk. This time the library was empty, and he seemed more willing to talk. I told him about the cold spots. I told him about the whispers. I didn't mention the figure in the mist. I didn't mention Maya's doll. I was afraid he would think I was crazy. He listened patiently, his face unreadable. He let out a long sigh and took off his glasses, polishing them slowly.